All right, we do it every day. Football at 4. It's time to jump into the Eagles. The NFL Week 8 is here. You can listen to the Eagles and the Bills Sunday. Coverage starts with the Countdown to Kickoff show. Tony Bruno and company live from Tollman Joe's, and they will be there at 10 a.m. John McMullen, a part of that broadcast, along with Colin Thompson. By the way, Scott Grayson, I just sent him a text. He will be in Buffalo for the game, so we'll get his reaction for Grayson's grades on Monday. But right now, let's check out what happened inside that locker room today. So the timeline is this. I don't even know what time the Undisputed show comes on, but the fact that Doug Peterson spoke and nobody asked him about it, I'm assuming it's sometime in that time range, in like the 1 o'clock range or 11 o'clock range or somewhere in that range, because nobody asked anything to Peterson about it. So it must be going on in conjunction or somewhere around there. But John, first off, let's get your reaction on how credible you think Scandrick's comments are.
Well, not very, considering the Eagles just put up a clip of him praising Malcolm Jenkins on the sidelines as they were mic'd up in the Vikings game, calling him what a leader he was, playing till the end of the game, every snap, when he forced that fumble late in what was a blowout game. And then you just take some of the comments and they lack credibility, to be honest. And others, Lane Johnson said it was probably a fair statement about him and that he should have handled what he said a little bit better. But Jalen Mills spoke about Malcolm, and obviously anybody who's been around that team, been around that locker room, you can criticize every player for certain things. We talk about this with Carson Wentz. I kind of always default to that. Not everybody likes everybody. So you can criticize everybody, but to criticize Malcolm Jenkins for not being a leader, and by the way, talk about that particular play where Rasul Douglas was beat. After the game, Malcolm said it was his fault. And he took, I mean, right away. It didn't even take him a long time. He said, that's my mistake. So that's where you look at it and say, some of these things just lack credibility.
Yeah. He did mention that there's an accountability problem in that locker room. I don't know if he's taking a shot at Howie, who he obviously said he didn't care for him all that much, that he's a liar, essentially, whether he's taking a shot at Doug, whether it's more shots at the leaders on that team.
Yeah, well, he kind of said, which is also ironic, he said the Eagles don't know how to handle success, and everybody points out that Orlando's been around for 12 years, and Brandon Graham kind of snickered at that. He doesn't have a Super Bowl ring. So him talking about other people who have had success handling success is a little bit weird. So that's another thing. He clearly doesn't like Howie Roseman. There's no he's not the first, by the way. There's a number of people who don't like Howie Roseman, and that's part of that job. I mean, you have to cut and release players all the time. So when you do that, there's always going to be some ill will. So that part of it's no surprise. I think the most positive part of it all, and I heard you, it was we did not, pretty much the Undisputed show was on the same time we were talking to Doug. So we didn't have the information when we were talking to him. But if you want to look for a positive spin, he said Carson Wentz, who's been taking all these hits, is a stand-up guy, good teammate, and all that kind of stuff. So he actually complimented Carson Wentz.
So I guess he's not the leaker to Josina Anderson. Then we can rule out Orlando Scandrick.
Well, it's funny because Josina said on record she put a cryptic tweet out there. So everybody's jumping that leap and saying she confirmed. She did not confirm. She's just saying there are people in that locker room, and there are people in every locker room. This is about winning and losing. That's all it's about. When you lose, people point fingers. It happens in every NFL city. I said it yesterday on the show. That's just what happens.
Let me ask you this, John, about from a front office standpoint, from Howie Roseman and the personnel people, they don't like these kind of things, but they also know that when they lose in Philadelphia, these things always happen. Where do you think they are in that tug of war? Do you feel like they are concerned and bothered by this rash of criticism, or do you think that they just pass it off as byproduct of losing?
Well, I think they pass it off as a byproduct of losing. Talked to some people behind the scenes, and that was the intimation given to me. But at the same time, I think if you go back to the Super Bowl year, one of the, I won't say underreported, but one thing that everybody kind of forgot about is how many veteran free agents they hit on, whether it was Patrick Robinson or Chris Long or LeGarrette Blount, or players like that, and they just seem to hit on everybody on those short-term one-year deals. And now it's not happening. And I think they're looking back at what did we miss with Orlando Scandrick? What did we miss with Zach Brown? So I think I'm not going to put Akeem Spence in that category because Akeem was a great guy. I mean, I don't know anybody on the planet that couldn't get along with Akeem Spence. It was just a performance issue for him. So I think they look at it and say, you know, maybe that's a self-inflicted wound, not understanding some of the personalities they were bringing into this locker room.
By the way, breaking news here, Deanna Rossini from ESPN tweeting, she was told the Eagles front office is not happy with these comments.
Oh, wow.
You don't say, John.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Water is wet
today. I had no idea.
But if you tell me it's nice out, if you tell me it's going to rain, I'm going to wear shorts.
This is, you know, in some ways, I think Doug specifically loves this because Doug loves to play the us versus them card. Loves to frame the media as the bad guys, like we somehow forced Orlando Scandrick to say these things. We forced somebody to talk to Josina Anderson. It's silly, but it works, and it's worked in the past, and he's used it. And now you have to wonder if he's going to this well too often, but he's going to use it again, and it's worked in the past.
Yeah, if you're Doug, that's kind of what I was going to get into with you here next, John. So good segue. How does he handle all this? How are the Eagles players handling it? Players only meeting. Doug rallies the troops before the next practice. Like what happens from here?
Yeah, it's us versus them, and it's going to be interesting on Sunday because, man, I didn't hear the Buffalo Bills mentioned once today. It's almost an afterthought that they actually have to play a game on Sunday. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this team comes out. And you know, Malcolm said he's not worried about it at all. He knows this team is going to respond. And I think it's going to be interesting. It can go one of two ways. And they can use this and turn their season around, start heading in a positive direction, or I could see it going the other way as well, and the wheels come off. So I think in so many ways this game is going to be so interesting just to see how this team handles, because it's not just Orlando Scandrick. It was the Josina Anderson. It was the anonymous sources. And now the Fletcher Cox 911 call came out today. Nobody's even talking about that. I mean, you could pinch a tent there. The circus is in town.
Well, John, is there, though, all right, is there anything in there that was damning? Was there anything in there that you say, you know what, maybe this one, but that one there holds some weight and holds some water? Anything in there that makes you raise your eyebrows?
Who, from Orlando?
Yeah.
Or I don't know if it made me raise some eyebrows, but it doesn't surprise me that he doesn't like Howie Roseman. And again, he's not the only one.
Yeah, he's got to get in line.
Yeah, those I said at the beginning that for instance, I guess let me just throw a couple people like the Nick Foles. He's not walking through that door. Does that give some thought that the Foles, there's still a Foles conglomerate in that locker room? Like, does that open some eyes to that at all?
Yeah, Orlando claims there is. I I mean, I don't know if there is. I haven't seen anyone overtly. I mean, there's a lot of people in that locker room that like Nick Foles. But Carson Wentz, I think, likes Nick Foles from a personal standpoint. I think there's certainly frustration from Carson's perspective that that small minority exists, and he kind of, I think, to a fault at times, carries that around, which I think he's got to just get past it. So I think there's a little bit of truth to that. But I mean, these guys play football for a living. I don't think anybody there thinks Nick Foles is a better quarterback than Carson Wentz. I really don't. I don't think anybody thinks that.
So in totality with this here, the anonymous sources from a couple of years ago, the Philly Voice article, then the anonymous sources from this year, and to where we are today with Orlando Scandrick, will this all be the motivating factor that turns this Eagles season around, or will we look back and say, man, that Super Bowl was great, but it really went all downhill from there?
Well, that was one of Orlando's claims. I mean, I don't know how credible it is, only because he wasn't here when they won the Super Bowl. But from his perspective, he thinks some of the leaders kind of use that as a crutch, that we've done it before and we can turn on a switch and we can do it again. So that was one of his criticisms. Hey, you got to be realistic. I mean, they've essentially been, Doug talked about the new normal when they won the Super Bowl. They've essentially been a 500 team. And so the new normal is a lot like the old normal, because this is, the cliche is this is an 8-8 league. The Eagles have essentially been a 500 team since the Super Bowl. Whether that is because they don't know how to handle success, I don't know. I always look at the Patriots, and I think that's more impressive about them. I mean, I think there is a human nature aspect of saying, when things go wrong, you go, well, we already got one. So, okay. So I do think there's that part of it, and that's what makes the Patriots so unbelievable, that they've been able to do it year after year for so many years. But I don't think that's anything more than human nature, like I said.
Hey, John, am I allowed to ask a Buffalo question here?
Is that who they're playing?
They are playing the Bills. And by the way, while you were talking, I was also reading this Fletcher Cox transcript, and oh my God, this has the makings of a movie. I'm interested to see who they'll get to play it. But the weather is supposed to be terrible. They're talking about downpours and like 35, 50 mile per hour, basically a normal fall day in Buffalo. How do you think that impacts the game plan, and do you think that favors one team over the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think it favors Buffalo a little bit. Only because they are certainly a little bit more used to some bad weather games. That's part of playing in Buffalo. And then you just look at Frank Gore as being that type of back that could really do some damage in that type of environment. But then again, I think Jordan Howard could do as well if the Eagles would use him in that aspect. There's kind of, from an offensive coach's standpoint, you talk about heavy rain games, and there's two schools of thought. You look at that Washington-San Francisco game where everybody scaled everything back, and there's some offensive coaches who believe the offense has such a huge advantage because obviously when there's a slippery surface, they know where they're going, the defense doesn't. I think Doug would be more of the latter there and won't shy away from throwing the football, but a lot of that has to do with his DNA, and we always talk about it. He wants to throw the football.
John, sticking with the unpopular topic of previewing the Eagles-Bills game on Sunday, I want your thoughts on the Bills offensively. So,
do they have a football team in Buffalo?
I think so.
Yeah, they beat Temple earlier this year.
What it's and Rutgers. But if you're the Bills, how are you planning on attacking the Eagles? Obviously, the weather is going to be a factor, but Josh Allen has struggled getting the ball down the field, and obviously we know the Eagles' struggles in the secondary. So do you anticipate the Bills to try and open things up, or Allen's struggles deep could play into the Eagles' favor?
No, I think the Bills attack everybody the same way with their defense. I mean, their defense is legit, top 5 defense in this league, I think, not only statistically but from a talent standpoint. I think that's the bigger issue. Offensively, they're just not very good at this stage, and a lot of it has to do with a young quarterback who's developing. And he does 2 things really well. He's really athletic. He can run the ball. He can hurt you that way, not only scrambling, but design runs. Jim Schwartz talked about that earlier this week. And he's got a huge arm. So he can throw it over you. And they do have John Brown, who's a legitimate deep threat receiver. We've seen the Eagles struggle time and time again with deep balls. But in a lot of ways, I think this is a helpful week for the Eagles defense because there's not going to be consistency. There's just not with that offense. And you know what it kind of is. We just talked about Frank Gore. Frank Gore's great. It's amazing when you look, Adrian Peterson, I think, is number 6 on the all-time list. He passed, he moved up to that spot last night. And you think about it, Frank Gore's ahead of him. That's amazing. I mean, he's been around and producing for so long, but he is what he is. He's not going to scare you. He's more of a mucker and a grinder, which is good in the mud and the rain, but it's not explosive. And I think that's good for this Eagles team because they keep giving up X plays. And I think if you just cover John Brown, they're not going to get many X plays.
Yeah, one spot where we talked about a lot this week is where the Eagles are hurting. It's been the secondary talk for 7 weeks, but this week it's defensive tackle. You mentioned Gore. Is that something that you think could be a red mark on Sunday, or do you think that they have that under wraps? Because keep in mind, they're down 5 defensive tackles, it seems like, and Nigel Bradham's out. Zach Brown's no longer here. I mean, they don't have Mike Singletary playing middle linebacker, but is the run game a concern this week?
Well, I think it's always a concern if you're going to roll out Nate Gary and Camus Grugier-Hill again. In some ways, I'd like to see them give T.J. Edwards, who's undrafted rookie, but he's a legitimate linebacker, 240 pounds. I think this might be more of a T.J. Edwards game. We'll see if they use that. And they brought in one of the 2 defensive tackles, is Anthony Rush, and he's just a monster, 350 pounds. Now, he's never played an NFL game, but you would think if he can do anything, it's just take up a double team and force people to push that 350 pounds around and out of the way. And if they have to do that, that should open up some things for those linebackers to flow to the football. So maybe this is a good week to have somebody just with the pure size of Anthony Rush in there. It wouldn't necessarily work every week when you have, a couple weeks ago when they had to face Dalvin Cook. Maybe that wouldn't have been the best week, but this week seems like a good week.
John McMullen, Football at 4, and, of course, this Eagles-Bills game. I mean, as much as it sounds like I hate that must-win term. I'm never that must-win guy because mathematics say that, no, it's not a must-win. The Eagles can get hot after this. But if they lose this game Sunday, this is not a great Bills team. It's a solid Bills team. They're better than they've been. But will this tell a story? If they don't go up there and win with all this stuff that's going on, will this tell a story?
Yeah, I think it will. I think, we keep holding on to this back end of the schedule, which is really weak from an opponent standpoint, those final 5 games. So it's going to be hard to be out of this division because the division's weak as well. So I agree with you. Even if they lose, they're not out of it. But I think from an emotional standpoint, I think it would say a lot if they can't win this game and they can't use what they always use. And Doug is, as I mentioned, is going to that well again. Us versus them. The media's piling on. The media's negative. He's doing that this week. He pulled out that card. So if they don't respond to it, I think it says something.
You believe a little bit, John, in the law of averages here? I mean, the Eagles have really stunk it up 2 weeks in a row, but you take a step back, you look at teams that are bad, that lose by a lot, like the Bengals, the Jets, or whatever, and then you look at the Eagles and you say, even with the injuries, they've got talent. You know, you got a Pro Bowl tight end, a really good quarterback, a good offensive line, good defensive linemen, good pass rushers. Do you believe that they put it together because it's really about they're not really what you've seen the last 2 weeks?
Yeah, I agree. I expect them to respond. I think, Doug mentioned they're an angry team. They're mad. Malcolm is mad. I mean, he's usually a very cool, calm, collected person who's used to speaking, and not only to the media, but in if you think about him speaking on his social activism and things like that in front of government bodies, he's just a very measured person, and he's throwing MFers out there. He's mad at Orlando Scandrick, and rightfully so. And
that's why you never sign a Cowboy, John. You never sign a Cowboy.
I can't think of
Emotion
one that has worked out.
and it can hurt you, and we're going to see, because I think some of the Eagles are going to be emotional, and we'll see which way it swings.
Angry safeties hit harder instead of hungry dogs run faster.
They're not allowed to hit hard anymore.
Well, that's
that
true.
might hurt
That's
them.
true.
That'll get you a few 15-yard penalties.
All right, John McMullen's, of course, his exclusive official pick right here on the Sports Bash Friday Football at 4 edition. What do you got, John?
I think it's going to be an ugly game, although that's kind of redundant. When you talk about the modern NFL, they're all ugly. That game last night was just hideous. But Jeff mentioned the weather. I think it's going to be low scoring, and I'm picking the Eagles. I think they're going to win the game 20-13.
20-13, Philadelphia. John McMullen's pick. He likes Sal Palantonio. Both picked the Eagles to win in an ugly one. I heard Mike Kay on the midday show with Mays and Aton also picked the Eagles 17-16. So a lot of really low-scoring, muckety-muck type ugly Eagle wins on the Sports Bash. John McMullen will be on the Countdown to Kickoff show with Tony Bruno. I'm guessing Tony Bruno will be hosting the show. I'm not 100% sure of his medical update, but hopefully he's doing well, and I know Johnny Mack will be there. John, you the man. Have a great weekend, pal.
All right. Enjoy the game, guys.
Yeah, man. John McMullen, like all guests, appeared to be the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.